Hello everyone, I'm Hugo.
And I'm Jake.
And this is the Bible Reloaded.
It's true.
And today we're doing yet another one of our TBR reviews.
TBR review.
And we've done a couple films at this point.
Yep.
We've done God Is Not Dead.
Jesus Camp.
We've done Kidnap for Christ. And this film is different than those other ones because I think the ramifications of this film in particular are more grave than the others, because it doesn't just impact a small group of people or individuals. It impacts an entire region and the culture of that region, and it's something that, seriously, something needs to change before things get worse than they already are. And I'd consider this the third in the trinity of Christian evangelical films, that being Kidnap for Christ, Jesus Camp, and now, the film we're doing today, God Loves Uganda. So the film begins with some vistas of places in Uganda, and it's a very beautiful country in the rural areas, and it shows some small communities and villages and children playing, and over this we get a voiceover, and that voiceover tells us that, you know, they love Uganda, but something is coming to potentially destroy it from the inside out, and it sounds very ominous. He comes to the conclusion, and he says that thing is evangelism from the United States.
Yeah, and throughout the course of this film, we're going to be studying the relationship between very extreme right-wing Christian evangelical groups and their interactions and what happens when they go to places like Uganda and spread their message and their influence and pretty much their culture to these places that it's brand new for, and the ramifications of that.
So after we get our title, we cut to Kansas, Missouri, and the headquarters for IHOP, which actually stands for the International House of Prayer, and this is the evangelical organization that we're going to be following for much of the film. Now, if you'll remember in our review of Jesus Camp, there was a man who came and was a special speaker, and he taught the kids about abortion, and he had those figures of fetuses, quote, air quotes, but really they were just like little tiny babies. Very inaccurate, unscientific view of development in the womb. And this guy's name was Lou Engle.
And Lou Engle is the guy who's basically like the head of IHOP. He's the guy that is like the motivation behind all the things they do. And every time he speaks, it's really emotional, and he really knows how to get people going, and he's really great at it, and that's kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, and this also made me realize that, unfortunately, much like the Marvel films, all documentaries that kind of look at evangelism take place in the same universe.
And, of course, they have to show a super intense video of what our mission is and how bad we are at video editing.
There's this weird thing that I've noticed with people who put together presentations for Christians and the production value. The more Christian something is, and I'm going from a scale from, like, you know, let's say Unitarians to evangelicals, the more conservative they are, the worse they are at making videos. Let's look at Bible Man. Terrible production quality.
In a world where the white man's burden isn't just something you read about in history books.
So we have a representative of IHOP come, and they show us a poster that they have, and this poster lists basically the hierarchy of all their employees and their various divisions. And he talks about specific divisions. They have various prayer divisions, and what those are, their job is to actually get different prayer requests, and then they just pray about it.
I wish that was my job. If I could just sit in a room and be told to be like, think about a thing for like 8 hours straight for minimum wage, I'd be like, yes, please.
I'm game.
And then this guy goes on to explain basically his mission statement for the whole place, and he says, quote, "We're going to take over the world by preaching words."
We heard that in Jesus Camp, too, actually.
Yeah.
Becky Fisher had a very similar outlook, and I think a lot of evangelicals do, at least those who are in the power structure, not necessarily those in the laity. They essentially say that it's Jesus' great commission for them to go out and spread their message to the entire world and convert everyone to their view of the world, which, I mean, I disagree with them, but, you know, that's what their goal is.
Yep. And shortly after this moment, we see probably my favorite moment in the entire film, my favorite shot at least, and it's of this guy. Look at that guy. You know what that guy did? That guy heard music right after he got stoned, and he just wandered into this building. He's like, oh yeah.
He's feeling it. He doesn't know what's happening, but he saw IHOP on the outside, and he's like, I could go for some pancakes, and that's some music. He got inside, there weren't pancakes, but he let it go once he saw what was going on. He's like, this is chill, man. I'm okay with this.
You guys, why do they call them pancakes?
You don't make them in a pan.
And they're also flapjacks, though.
Who's Jack? Stupid. So Lou talks a little bit more about the focal point of the documentary, and that is Africa, or more specifically Uganda. And he makes a statement that for evangelicals, at least, or people in his community, Africa is the firepot of spiritual renewal. They're trying to target various African nations, sub-Saharan or Central African countries, for these revivals and these bring the spirit of evangelism to places where it's never been.
Right after this, we're going to meet the guy who's kind of buttressing the entire argument against evangelism throughout the film. And his name is Reverend Kwama, and he's actually a Zambian citizen, but he went to Uganda to research the Christian right, and shortly thereafter, after he had been supporting LGBT rights, because he's actually a very progressive guy, they actually kick him out.
Yeah. And they didn't just kick him out, it was that he fled because he was afraid for his family's life, and as we discuss more what happens in the documentary, you'll understand why. And I like characters like this. We have this sort of character in pretty much all the documentaries about evangelism that we've seen. And they're the Christian who's the moderate, who's the reasonable one, and I like this for a couple reasons. First of all, it allows Christians who may be more right-wing or more conservative or just more extreme in their views to see that, hey, you can still be Christian and follow what you believe the Bible says, whatever, and you can still treat people with respect, even if you don't agree with them, and that's good. I think that's a good thing for people to have, because most people not willing to necessarily change their religious views, unfortunately, but at the very least, I think it's good for people to learn, hey, you have to have respect for other people, and treat them equally. Secondly, I think this is good for atheists, because I've seen, especially with a lot of young atheists, there's an anger that comes out of it, and you see some people start to think that everyone who's religious is some conservative asshole who doesn't respect anyone, and that's just not true. I have plenty of Christian friends. I know Jake does too. There are tons of moderate, reasonable Christians who, at the end of the day, maybe despite their religious views sometimes, treat people with the utmost respect, and they're just nice people. And that's good. I definitely don't want anyone to get the idea that we think like all Christians are fucking assholes.
No,
we don't.
Absolutely not. In fact, we're really big fans of all three of these moderate Christians that we mentioned. Mike Papantonio from Jesus Camp, who was the radio host, if you guys remember that. The director of Kidnapped for Christ started off as an evangelical Christian and became moderate as she learned more. And then, obviously, Reverend Kalma and a character we will actually meet later in this film, too.
So Reverend Kalma is actually very concerned about the effect American conservatives are having on Uganda. He says that religion is being used to demonize and kill. And he says this because when looking at Uganda, he says it's very different than looking at a place like the United States. Whereas in the United States, people like evangelicals might say that they're very, very against homosexuality and say that it's a sin and horrible, but they're not necessarily going to do anything about it other than just say that. However, in a place like Uganda, it's more typical for people, especially in rural areas, to take justice, air quotes, into their own hands. So they might say, homosexuality is an evil, we know someone who is homosexual, therefore we are going to go and hurt them because we think we are in the right. And this plays into another theme of the documentary, which is trying to push your cultural ideals on other cultures can end in very bad and violent things.
And he actually singles out IHOP in this kind of little speech, and he says that IHOP's basically their main goal is they go into these neglected communities and then they pretend to help, and through that guise of help they impose their own values on the community, which can be very dangerous when changing a culture. Usually there's a lot of pushback, and usually there's a lot of extremism for the new culture that's being in place. We actually see a lot of examples of that throughout the film, and we'll point them out as they come up.
And I think when he's talking about this, it plays into the fact that this is a symptom of a greater problem, and that is that not enough charitable organizations are helping areas like this.
Yeah.
When they are neglected by a lot of the populace, it allows places like IHOP or other evangelical organizations to come in with their ulterior motives and try and give maybe infrastructure and maybe a little bit of food and stuff under the guise of being helpful, but at the end of the day, all they care about is getting their message across.
Right. And that's not to say they don't think they're helping. I think most of the time they do think they're helping. But they're kind of not, and they're kind of making the situation a lot worse. And as this film continues, you can kind of see the repercussions of this kind of idea.
We have a group of missionaries from IHOP who are planning their trip. They're kind of getting their itinerary together and devising goals for their trip. And there's this one woman who says something that pretty much encapsulates everything we just discussed. Yeah. And she says,
"What defines success for me, specifically related to orphans, is walking away and seeing the orphans have a desire and a knowledge of how to pray."
Not to necessarily help their well-being or to help them find families, which, you know, I mean, that's a pretty lofty goal in and of itself, whatever, I get that. But her number one goal is to just try and help them find Jesus, which in her mind I can understand would be a number one goal. She's thinking, well, even if they die, at least they'll go to heaven.
Right.
But from our perspective, let's say, that's not really helping that child in any tangible way.
And when you watch it, part of you really wants to be like, man, what are you doing? Why don't you just see what's wrong? And you got to take a step back, because her entire worldview says this is the right thing to do. So she's not being malicious, and none of these people really, I don't think they're hurting anyone. And it's kind of sad to see well-intentioned people hurt people kind of across the board.
Yeah. So we get an interview with that woman, and she says something I find pretty funny. She says, you know, I knew from when I was 6 years old I wanted to be a missionary, and it just made me think, when I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a monster truck. But I'm on YouTube now. Life doesn't always give you what you want, lady. When you're 6, you're not able to make these decisions. If my dream came true, I'd be doing shows for a bunch of rednecks and crushing cars. And I'd be best friends with Truckosaurus, but we can't all get what we want.
So we get another interview with Lou right after that, and he continues to explain his kind of worldview. And he says,
if you throw God out of the picture, then everybody has rights to do anything, and you get moral chaos, and that's really what's going on, I think, in our nation.
He's kind of veiling his anti-LGBT in that a little bit, because as we continue in this film, it starts to get more and more clear as to what their agenda is, and that is to basically rid the earth of LGBT rights. And he actually had a lot to do with that here in the States. If you guys remember back when Prop 8 was a thing, the gay marriage bill back in California, Lou Engle was actually one of the main reasons that got struck down and gays couldn't marry for that short period of time in California. He actually got over 33,000 people into a stadium to come in and vote and make noise and be loud and basically say, no, we don't want gay rights. And it worked for a little bit, and that's kind of what's scary. If he can do that here, imagine the influence a guy like this has in Uganda, where they believe almost everything he says.
Yeah, luckily that did end up getting overturned in court, though, so now gay marriage is legal not only in California, but most states in the United States as of this year, which is really cool. We're waiting to see which one's last. To steal a joke from John Oliver, we're waiting for you, Mississippi. You're gonna be last.
Damn it, Mississippi.
So Lou, in sort of a defensive manner, says, you know, people keep saying I want a theocracy, and I don't want that. And then he goes on to explain what he does want, and he pretty much exactly describes what a theocracy is, so go ahead and take a look.
I do believe that God has foundational laws by which he set into the universe and expects governmental leaders to uphold natural and spiritual law.
After this, we get back to Reverend Kwame. He basically explains why it's so effective going to places like Uganda, importing evangelism. And he explains that there was a power vacuum in Uganda after General Idi Amin Dada was taken out of power. And right after that, American evangelicals saw an opportunity to basically spread the word, and they injected their values into the country of Uganda, and you can see it on the streets. Literally.
Yeah, we get some shots of this street in a city in Uganda, and I'm not talking about one street preacher right there. There are at least 3 or 4 right within earshot of each other, which is amazing. I mean, if I were a street preacher, at the very least, I'd be like, this area's saturated, I'll move on. But no, they're all preaching, all evangelical things, and most of the people on the street seem fairly receptive, except this one guy who's like, look
at that guy's face.
He's not into it. But
he is zero into it.
It really goes to show how far evangelism has permeated into the society just in the past decade or so. We then cut to Uganda's largest church, which is called the Miracle Center Cathedral, and it is evangelical, and it was built by Americans, not necessarily by their hands or anything, but with money donated by people like IHOP and other evangelical organizations. And we also meet the pastor there, Reverend Kayanja. He actually is, by the way, one of the richest people in Uganda.
Are you surprised?
No.
I'm not surprised.
He's the Joel Osteen of Uganda.
Except he has smaller teeth, which is, it would be a superhuman feat to match the Olstein teeth anyways, so.
We see a little bit of their service, and actually from a viewpoint of just studying another culture and the fusion of cultures, it's very interesting to see their service, because you can see both influence of evangelical services and maybe more traditional African religious experiences kind of fused, because it's an evangelical sermon, but there's a lot more physicality to it.
Absolutely.
And it's louder, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems more like what you would think of when you think of more traditional African religions.
It's
very interesting.
It's definitely a very interesting fusion of Western and African culture kind of smashing together and seeing what happens. And there's a lot of passion in these people, and it's very... it's interesting, a little disheartening, but very interesting.
We also get a chance to look at Pastor Kayanja's house, which is just amazing. This has to be one of the nicest houses in Uganda.
So beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's like, it would be a nice house for, like, California, upper scale California. So it's a very, very nice house. It's borderline an estate, I would say.
Or a compound.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a compound estate.
And he has a servant, actually, too, which you can see in one of the shots. So he is very, very well off. He is by no means getting by the skin of his teeth. He could probably be given a little bit more to charity, honestly, seeing how some of these people live in Uganda. So that's unfortunate, but, it's that kind of documentary, so you get the obligatory hypocritical shots and whatnot. But
so now our missionaries finally, after a lot of buildup, they land in Uganda. And one of the first scenes you see looks like Johnny Knoxville's cousin trying to teach a classroom about sexual immorality.
Yeah, and here's where our problems stem from. Some people, especially Christians who are watching this, might say, why do you care what these people are doing and teaching? It'd be one thing if they were just building schools and teaching. That's awesome.
Yep.
Any sort of charity, regardless of who does it, I'm all for it. But the problem is the messages they're getting across. Yeah. They're teaching these young kids their idea of, quote, sexual immorality. And that includes no sex before marriage, which is pretty common amongst evangelicals and Christians in general. And also anti-gay, and not just being gay is wrong, but being gay is somehow sinful and evil and detrimental to people. Now, the problem becomes even larger when you understand that they're promoting abstinence-only education, not comprehensive sex ed. And if you know anything about the studies surrounding those two things, we know that abstinence-only education only serves to increase the number of STDs and unwanted pregnancies in any given area. Unfortunately, since this is the primary thing being taught in Uganda, it only serves to increase the HIV/AIDS epidemic that's been going on for years.
Sadly, we find out from Reverend Kalma that it was actually getting better during the Clinton years. And as you know, Clinton, as a progressive liberal president, he actually pushed for safe sex education, especially in Africa, to try to stem the tide of AIDS. And numbers were going down, not just with AIDS, but all STDs. And it was looking good. But of course, George Bush comes in, and I'm not making a comment about politics necessarily, just what happened. George Bush comes in, and because of his platform and his constituents, he was basically obligated to go to an abstinence only based upon his very strong Christian base. And he was urged to do so. And under pressure from the U.S. For funding reasons, Uganda switched over to the U.S. policy, the new U.S. policy of abstinence only, so that they could get aid money. And what happens? Well, AIDS and STDs, the rates go up because you're not helping people protect themselves.
And the problem with this is, I mean, if you're talking to someone who believes in abstinence-only education, their line would be, abstinence works 100% of the time. Well, the problem is, abstinence doesn't work 100% of the time because people don't follow abstinence. All you're doing is keeping information from people that they need to know. If you want to help people stop contracting HIV/AIDS, you need to help them understand how you do contract it and how to stop it. Condoms are effective. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if someone has HIV/AIDS, I'm probably still not going to have sex with them, even with a condom. But I mean, in a country where it's so prevalent, you need to teach people protection. You just do. It's such an issue. There's no reason not to.
And it's also important to note that you're taking abstinence to a country that is culturally predisposed to people having a lot of sex to try to create more offspring, because that's kind of how their agricultural and economic system has always worked. And obviously they're moving from that, but there's always growing pains inside of a culture that's changing. And so culturally, it's still like a woman's obligation to provide children, or at least to please the man sexually, and that's generally what happens. Now you can stop that kind of thing by providing contraception.
So amongst all this talk about sex education and abstinence only, we actually get to meet our second really, really awesome guy from the movie. His name is Christopher Sanyanjo, and he's very easy to spot in this. He has a priest's collar, and he wears a purple shirt and a pretty cool crucifix. And he basically says, I'm all for sex education, I'm all for condoms, why wouldn't you be? It's just pragmatic. People in this country are getting so sick because they're being taught wrong things. It's absurd, there's no reason not to. And this is, he's wearing a reverend collar, he's coming out of a Catholic church tradition, remember that.
It fills me with hope to see an old guy who, and we all know that older people generally are more conservative because, times change and they hold on to their old values. It's so interesting to see a guy that grew up in a country that is not progressive necessarily, that has progressive ideas, holds on to them, and is also a member of a church, and a very formerly, and we'll discuss that, high-ranking official in the church. And it's just a wonderful thing, and he's one of our favorite people in this entire film.
And also when we get that, we get some shots of a clinic where they're doing HIV/AIDS testing, and they're also handing out condoms to people. And this is also sort of a hopeful part of the movie, too, to know that people are doing this and people are volunteering to do this. Because if there's one job that I never want, it's being the person who has to administer HIV/AIDS tests in Uganda.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's got to be a stressful job, but I mean, good on them. They're doing something, not just for, because I assume they're probably paid, but you do that because you want to help people and you want to help your country. You don't just do that because it's a job.
And we actually get a scene where a grown man is being shown how to use a condom. And at first, to our Western eyes, this might seem absurd and this might seem kind of funny and you might giggle yourself a little bit. But this guy, it's the first time he's ever been shown what a condom even is. It's the first time he's been shown how to use one, and it's the first time someone's been telling him the facts about them. Think about that. If you were already in your 30s or late 20s and probably having, sexual relations with people, there's a good chance he might already have a disease, but that's only because he wasn't ever taught. And so it's really important to know that, education is really at the crux of this whole thing. And if you remember back, the evangelicals are in charge of the education. So it's really hard to get people moving towards this safer environment and this progressive thing.
One of the rarely seen but interesting characters that we meet next is Joanna Watson, and she actually works with IHOP, but she stays a lot of her time in Uganda, and she teaches others in the local community how to preach to people the gospel and whatnot, and extols their evangelical values. And she also has a weird moment where she says,
when I was in the States, this lady in my church asked me if I would be interested in marrying a black man. And I said, I have no problem with it. It's not a matter of color. It's a matter of the heart. But I don't know there's no desire for me for that. I'm not looking for a husband.
Which almost makes it more racist than if she were to just say no because they're black. It's as if she's actually saying that there's something fundamentally different about people of color, which is so fucking stupid. I want to punch her in her face.
And then we get to probably the most harmful individual we'll see in the entire film, and his name is Scott Lively. And he's not necessarily in this film directly. It's more about older speeches and older interviews he's given. And he basically started this really fervent anti-homosexual movement, especially in Uganda. He talks about homosexuality and everything that he says is wrong for it, and he says the craziest things.
He says that gays were responsible for the Holocaust and had a hand in starting the Nazi Party. He says that gays have taken over the UN, and I have no idea where he's getting this from. Yeah. I mean, even on the Security Council, you can look at, for one, Russia, which is adamantly anti-homosexuality, and the U.S., where half of the states in the Union don't even offer gay marriage. So no, he's wrong on that count. And he also says that gays are recruiting children because, of course, it's the 1950s, and we can totally conflate homosexuality and pedophilia, and no one will call you out on it.
The thing that I have the biggest problem with has to be the Holocaust, because, yes, it was a lot of Jews. Jews made up a large chunk of that pie. but homosexuals made up a very large chunk as well. So I don't get it.
So Scott Lively has been doing a lot more preaching in African nations like Uganda, because we can't spout the things he's been saying in the U.S. anymore, because we've gotten to the point as a society where we're not going to take that shit, and there are enough people who will call him out on his straight-up lies. Unfortunately, when he's in Uganda, people tend to listen to him because they don't have any other sources for that information. They might not know as much necessarily about the history of World War II and the Holocaust, so they might believe what he has to say. He also had a large part in helping form what the rest of the movie basically hinges upon, and that's the anti-gay bill in Uganda.
So what the anti-gay bill says is that if you are caught in a homosexual act or are accused of homosexuality and found guilty, in one instance, it's life imprisonment. If it's habitual, so you're a normal gay person, it calls for the death penalty, which is just a humanitarian nightmare. And I don't really understand how this kind of idea comes up in adult people at any stage in a modern society, but it does, and this guy is kind of the catalyst that began it.
So Scott Lively, we see a clip of him on actually a Ugandan TV show with someone named Martin Sempo, who we'll see later in the documentary, and you may have seen him on YouTube. He's pretty famous for a viral video that he was in, which we'll talk about when we get there. And he spouts the stupid stuff that we talked about earlier, but more interestingly, Martin Sempa, every single time something is said, he'll respond with, and this just bugged me. So here's all the in that scene, so you have to hear it the same way I did.
And my message to you, my message to Uganda, is don't let that happen here. As Christians, we're to step forward and to assert ourselves, to compete for authority in society, so that it is people who are guided by the Holy Spirit and who have the truth of God that are making the rules, that are setting the policies. As the scripture says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice.
So we come back to Christopher Sionjo, the guy that we talked about earlier, and he talks about his life, and he has such an interesting life story.
And kind of a sad one, and he's it just makes you love him a little bit more.
Yeah. He talks about shortly after he and his first wife got married, she unfortunately died very soon after that of a snake bite, and he's at her grave and talking about her, and he loved her very much. And he says that after that, he felt empty and he didn't know where to go, so that's why he joined the church. He became part of the Catholic Church, and he moved his way all the way up to a bishop. And he says that, in his career, plenty of people started coming to him saying, hey, I'm confused about my sexuality. And he made the decision that, you know what, I respect everyone, I think everyone deserves to be treated equally, and I'm okay with that. That's a position that I respect immensely, despite our theological disagreements. And he also, as we said before, very pro-contraceptives and comprehensive sex education. So unfortunately, the Catholic Church, in all its infinite wisdom, decided to excommunicate this incredibly reasonable, kind man, and now he's kind of a rogue agent.
Yeah.
He still goes and he teaches, and he still plays the role of a priest, but he is not officially recognized by the Catholic Church any longer.
And actually now he has like this tiny kind of makeshift church that a lot of people like to go to, and he's a little bit of a celebrity, sort of, in some circles, especially LGBT ally circles. So we
finally come back to the missionaries from IHOP in Uganda, and they're about to go out and do their whole preaching the gospel thing, but before they do that, they all get in a prayer circle together, and they're all kind of doing separate prayers, so it just sounds like rabble. And it always makes me wonder, I mean, even when I was a Christian, I wasn't part of any sort of prayer circle like this, so what's the protocol for this? How do you know when you're done praying? Because everyone's doing their own individual thing, and I gotta assume you don't want to be the first person who's done in the prayer circle, because, like, you love Jesus less or something. Like, I think it's probably like a circle jerk where you don't want to be the first one done, but you definitely don't want to be the last one done either.
Absolutely not. You do not want cleanup duty on a circle jerk or a prayer jerk. And then our brave young adventurers from IHOP go out into the African world, and they go out into Uganda, and they're going to go preach to the masses. But first they have to load into this van and drive down the street and get stopped by food vendors. And this is the cringiest part of the film. Given all the bad shit that happens in the film, this is the part that makes you go, ugh.
Just makes you uncomfortable because these people are bringing them food, and if you've ever been to a foreign country that's not exactly a first world country. You know that if someone realizes you're a tourist or not from around there, they're definitely going to come to you and try and sell you things. So lots of people come to their car and try and sell them what looks like delicious local foodstuffs. But instead of just having a transaction with them, they buy the food as a pretense for preaching to them. So the person will be there and they'll be like, have you heard about Jesus? And a lot of the people react like anyone would when they're being asked about religious things. They kind of are standoffish and like, no. And a few of the people they talk to seem to just be there because they don't know how to just walk away from the conversation. At least one of them, though, which is the most interesting conversation they have, says, well, I'm a Muslim, because, you know, a lot of African nations have an Islamic population. And the guy's reaction is just the worst.
Muhammad came later, much later. Muhammad came 500 years after Jesus. But then he said Isa was a prophet of Islam.
What? That's not valid. You don't get validity from being older. That's the worst argument I've ever heard against Islam.
Not only that, but this person apparently doesn't know that Jesus, like, is in the religion of Islam. He's just not a deity. He's, you know, another prophet. So this person proves a couple things. He doesn't know how to make a good argument for his religion. He doesn't know how other religions work, and he doesn't know how to talk in a social circle outside of his own personal group.
So, in one of the sadder parts of the film, we actually find out that the media is also on board with evangelism, which is kind of rare for a country. Usually, especially here, media tends to be a little bit more liberally leaning, and I mean, you do have your Fox Newses and stuff, but it's usually not like fascist. This is kind of fascist. This newspaper called Rolling Stone, and I think they probably have a copyright infringement going on there. They print this, and it says 100 pictures of Uganda's top homos leak, and then on the side it says hang them, and it has the addresses and photos of 100 people who are called homosexuals, but actually the two on the front are not. The two on the front
are Christopher Sanyanjo, who is, as we said, the guy that we talked about before, who just seems like the nicest guy in the world. He just happens to be a pro-LGBT rights person. And another guy named David Kato, who is the head of a LGBT rights organization in Uganda, which takes so much balls. I applaud that guy, and I really respect what he did, because being in that country and doing that is so risky, especially when you can be printed in magazines like this. I mean, this actually angers me. I mean, we watch a lot of these films and we can be tongue-in-cheek and make jokes about it, but this is ridiculous. This is the largest abuse of journalistic powers I have ever seen in my life.
And as we said, this is a country that predicates itself on taking care of conflict internally between people. It's not really policed that heavily. And there's like rebel groups that cut people's lips off, and just crazy shit happens there. And people died from this.
So unfortunately, as you would imagine with something like this, David Kato was killed because of this newspaper. He was found beaten to death shortly after this was published. And that's fucking sickening, as you would imagine. So we see some of David Kato's funeral, which upsets you even more, because the guy who's giving the main eulogy is bashing the LGBT community, and as you'd imagine, quite a few of them are at the funeral because this guy was someone who supported them, and they're not only grieving, but they're distraught because they're so afraid. They're afraid things are going to happen to them as well. If they're willing to brutally kill this person who is just a supporter of them, what are they going to do to them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, our purple pastor, Christopher Sanyanjo, after the first service, he actually walks with a group of LGBT allies and friends and family to the burial site, and he actually gives his own eulogy. And in it, he says, like, you know, he was a good man, he did good things. You guys, anyone who's gay or bi or whatever, you don't have anything to feel sorry about. You're people. I love you. I respect you, and you're all good people. And and you can just see the effect this kind of thing has on the people around. And there's one shot in particular it just kind of stays with you. I think it's a girl, and they're crying basically at the feet of Sanyanjo near the casket, and she says, like, they're going to kill us, and it just rips your fucking heart out, because that's a real thing. Like, here, it doesn't happen often, thankfully. It does happen, but not often. Usually it's more of a peer issue and some beatings, which are terrible, but nothing nearly as bad as what happens in Uganda. And it's just one of those really sad moments, and you're just so happy that at least they have Senyanja there to kind of rally around and to get a little bit of comfort from this just amazing man, even though they just lost one of their biggest allies.
So we cut back to the missionaries, and they're actually out doing their missionary thing. They're going to small communities and villages, and they're talking to people. And the talking points they're using are very interesting, because I'm so used to now apologists, hearing apologists speak and trying to construct these incredibly complex arguments, because at this point, people in Western countries have heard all the old arguments before, the fire and brimstone arguments that we've all in the secular community have deconstructed over time, so they need to construct these complex apologetics. But nope, in Uganda, where a lot of people haven't heard the original, evangelical message, they can straight up say, you're gonna burn in hell if you don't do this, and seemingly people will be on board, and they'll be on board because they tell them, hey, if you do this, when you'll die, you'll go to heaven and it's paradise. All the stuff that you've, I'm sure, heard before. Yeah. And, this, I think, brings to light, too, one of the reasons that it works so well in places like Uganda, where the living conditions are terrible, compared to what we are used to. Because I think, if anything, evangelism thrives under poor conditions, because when people have a chance at hope, they're gonna take it, and that's what Christianity can do, and any religion with an afterlife can really do. It says, hey, your life might suck now, but all you have to do is have faith in this thing, and once you die, you'll have a reward. This isn't all for nothing. The meek shall inherit the earth.
Right after this, we get one of the craziest scenes, frankly, in film history for me, because it actually happened. So Martin Sempa, the guy that was an interviewer in that section, he's standing up and he's doing a rally against LGBT, and he's saying the craziest stuff.
And he gives this speech everywhere he goes, because it's in this movie, but if you've seen the YouTube video, he gives this same talk in another place, possibly in Uganda. It might be somewhere else in Africa, but it looks like it's an African nation. And he has a slideshow that we can't even show you parts of it. We're going to have to, at the very least, blur parts out. He talks about what he says the homosexual community is doing. Mm-hmm. He says, one, that they fist each other, just fisting each other all the time.
Okay, first of all, some people, fisting is a thing. It is not limited to homosexual communities. Straight people fist. Personally, not into it. Go for it if you guys want. It's cool. Just be careful. Fists are kind of big, okay? But second of all,
he says what I think should be his catchphrase. He's kind of dressed like an evil villain anyway. He has kind of a black robe with the red crosses. He says,
this one is eating the poo-poo, which is now all over his face.
And then you will see they eat the poo-poo. He's talking about scat play, and he's acting as if this is A, something that's exclusive to the homosexual community, and B, that many homosexuals do, because that's not common. That's not common amongst anyone. That's a very small group in any sexual orientation. Very few people are into poop.
Yeah. And while I don't advocate for it because of the obvious health risks involved, if you want to eat some shit or put some shit on your face, fucking go for it if you're consenting adults. But, he assumes that most gays do this, which is just utter bullshit.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the whole consent thing. I think it's gross, but even if every single person who was gay was like, yeah, I'm totally into eating poop, if they were doing it in their own time, in their own houses, I don't give a shit. That's not an argument against homosexuals. That's just an emotional reaction to something you think is gross. So, one of the last scenes of the film is Christopher Senyanja goes to a school in a different part of Uganda, and it was actually founded by a gay man. And at first the community was very against this guy, but seeing what he did for the community in building this school and helping educate children, they've begun to accept him. And this was a very uplifting moment, because you see that, change is possible, and people can come to accept people for who they are, even in a place where it's so against the grain to do so. And Christopher gives a really great speech to these kids at this school, and he behaves in, if Christians themselves were to try and define what Christians should be, and I think what they would say is essentially something along the lines of being accepting of everyone and being very loving and understanding. This is what that guy is. He gives a speech to these kids that say, hey, you need to respect everyone. Mm-hmm. We all live in a community, we all live in a world, and not everyone's going to agree with each other, but you still have to respect them, because we're all people and we all deserve that. treat other people how you want to be treated, and that's wonderful. And it gives me hope that this guy is teaching young kids this, and this is a message that not only kids in Uganda need, but I think everyone in the world needs to hear as a young kid. The simple act of respect for other people, even if you disagree with them, it's necessary. More people need to learn that. There are always going to be people we don't like or whatever, but you still need respect for other people. Just because you don't respect their ideas doesn't mean you shouldn't respect them. Everyone, at least on the surface level, deserves respect and kindness. Simple as that.
And luckily, Senyanjo's message is not dead in Uganda, and it's not just in this film. He actually, before this movie came out, in 2012, he was honored by former President Bill Clinton, and he was given the Clinton Global Citizen Award for leadership in civil society. So it's good to see that a civil rights worker and kind of social justice guy in such a pretty much bad situation is at least getting recognized, and so there's a little bit of a movement behind him, and the possibility for change is there, and they have just one of the best guys as sort of the not just the figurehead, but the catalyst behind it.
So the film ends, and we have some local Ugandans going out and preaching the gospel to other communities in Uganda, and it just goes to show how far that evangelism has permeated the society, where now not only are people from the United States coming and trying to be missionaries, people within the very country itself are trying to turn their fellow countrymen to this evangelism and to this anti-gay point of view.
Yeah.
Now, a little bit about what happened after the film. The anti-gay bill did actually pass their parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, kind of, I guess. Before it went through, it did change. They took out the death penalty part. So, luckily, you only get life imprisonment, which is still fucking horrible.
Yeah.
However, happy note, earlier this year, their version of the Supreme Court overturned that law and said it was unconstitutional, which is amazing.
Yep.
Good for them.
But it's still kind of being kicked around in Parliament, and it looks like they're going to try to appeal and put it back in and see if they can't get this pushed through. It seems like, though, their Supreme Court, or whatever they call it, is filled with kind of progressive, well-rounded individuals. So hopefully that is stamped out and kept down, and over time, hopefully the progressive nature of culture kind of takes over, and they can kind of move past this and not be such just a human rights nightmare.
And Scott Lively, the guy who we talked about, who had a big part in bringing the whole anti-gay agenda to Uganda, he's actually being sued in the United States by an LGBT advocacy group, saying that he had a hand in actively suppressing the human rights of LGBT people in Uganda and other African nations.
So that's good news, because fuck that guy.
Yeah, and I actually, when I read that, didn't think it was really going to go anywhere, just because it seems like such a broad accusation. Yeah. How do you even bring that to court? But so far, a judge has gone through with it, because Scott Lively and his attorney tried to put a stop to it altogether, saying this shouldn't go to court, but the judge said, no, they have grounds. So, in the future, look out for that. If anything happens with that, we might actually update, because that's very interesting.
Yeah. And before we head out, we really wanted to let everyone know that while stuff is actually pretty bad in Uganda, especially in regards to this, the GodLovesUganda.com website actually has 10 things that you can do. Not all include money. Some of them are just like you can sign a petition, and you can do other stuff. So we can't put it in the video because of YouTube restrictions, but if you please check out the description box right now, if you can, if you have like 5 minutes. Very first thing is going to be a link to this website, and just scroll through, and if you can do anything to help out the people, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, it would make a huge difference.
Yeah, there's some stuff for some petitions, and you can donate money if you want to this organization called All Out, and it's a global LGBT advocacy group, and they try and combat the misinformation and stuff that people like Scott Lively like to put out there, which really needs to be done. So at the very least, if you could sign a petition for them, it'd be very helpful. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. They also have, some other stuff. They have resources. If you wanted, for instance, if you're at a college or something and you wanted to have a screening of this film, they have resources to help you figure out how to do that legally. I mean, sure, you could probably just throw it up on a laptop on a projector, but I mean, if you wanted to go through the process, then they might have some materials to help you do that, like, hey, here's how you should bill it, here's how you should get people to come. So if you wanted to do that, that's cool. Help spread the message.
And
Check that out.
And I definitely suggest it for like SSA group, Secular Student Alliance, but also your Christian groups at like colleges. This is actually kind of a popular thing to do, is to host a screening of a film and then discuss it. And it's not only is it a really good way to get your group kind of exposure, but it's a really good way to get this kind of message across and to start a dialogue within your college and with young people, because young people are the people that are going to be making this world hopefully a better place through this kind of stuff. So it's important.
Yeah. So I think that's it for this episode. Thanks everyone who watched this. Thanks for all your support. If you want, we're always open to suggestions for movies. We're trying to do at least one of these movie reviews per month.
We get a lot of requests for them. So.
Yeah. So if you have any suggestions, go ahead and put those in the comments. Just a quick note, thanks everyone who donates to us on Patreon. We did hit our $500 goal. Yeah. This is where we would normally ask for you to donate to that, but instead, this episode, if you want to donate to anything, go to that God Loves Uganda site. Find a good cause there. Really great stuff. You can follow us on Twitter at Bible Reloaded.
You can follow Hugo at Hugo Reloaded.
And I think that's it. You know, thanks for everyone for watching. I know this episode
was not as funny as usual,
but I mean, it is an important thing we wanted to talk about. So I hope you got something out of it. And if you enjoyed it, go ahead and share it. Anywhere, just to try and help people hear about this stuff that's going on. And by the way, movie is on Netflix if you want to check it out. Excellent documentary.
Yeah, excellent.
So thanks everyone for watching. Until next time, I'm Hugo.
And I'm Jake.
And this has been The Bible Reloaded.